John Wick is a contract killer with a mile-high body count, a love of vintage cars, and a soft spot for little pups. What he isn't is real. But what if he was? We assembled experts in the fields of law, psychology, and firearms to analyze his movies as if they really happened and give a professional analysis of his adventures.
If I had to advise him in the moment whether he was going to use a knife, a gun, or a library book, I would advise library book all day, every day.
This is If John Wick Were Real.
My name is Dr. Drea Letamendi, and I am a clinical psychologist.
My name is Doug Ridley, and I am a criminal defense attorney.
I'm Jonathan Ferguson, Keeper of Firearms and Artillery for the Royal Armouries Museum here in the UK.
In John Wick 1, this retired assassin returns to his craft when a low-level mob goon kills his dog, one of the most unforgivable acts put to film. But the psychological effects of that assault may have run even deeper.
The loss of that dog becomes more than the loss of an animal companion. It is devastating for him. It is like losing everything that he has. This happens shortly after his wife dies. So there is this compound trauma. When traumas happen together, we can't really disentangle it. And in his mind, he's combined the loss of his wife with the loss of his dog.
Needless to say, if you mess with John Wick's dog, you're dead. But what kind of legal jeopardy does John put himself in during the first of his many shootouts?
Well, when all of the bad guys are coming in to try to kill John Wick at the beginning of that first movie, initially, they are all home invaders. So John actually has the ability to defend himself and to defend his home. That's what the law is just about universally in almost every state in the country. So somebody comes into John's house with a gun pointed at him, and he has reason to believe that they're going to kill him. He is absolutely within his rights of self-defense to go ahead and kill them first. The threat is there and it's real and it's apparent. Where it gets a little sticky is kind of what happens later.
How about the gunplay? Is Keanu handling himself well right off the bat?
The striking thing about the shootouts in the first movie is how sort of stripped down they feel. And although John Wick is benchmark action movie for the modern era in terms of how well shot everything is, how Keanu trains and the selection of weapons and everything, he's clearly slower than he becomes with more training between movies, more deliberate in his reloading. But the fact that the reloading's in there was just fantastic at the time.
And when in doubt, just follow the rule of cool and grab the craziest looking gun you can find for the sake of cinema.
The Kel-Tec KSG is a little bit off the wall, but it's the kind of perceived prestige firearm that a criminal might well have. 2 magazine tubes. We don't see John switch between them. I guess he must in order to fire as many shots as he does. He handles it very well. It's extremely cool. The sound effects in that first film are just great. That threatening shot off to the side, and then he racks it again. Yeah, intimidation, cool factor. It's all there.
Of course.
Back to the start of John Wick 1. With a house full of dead bodies, John can still claim self-defense. But when he calls the cleanup crew, his legal jeopardy begins.
The cleanup crew is kind of where this all falls apart from a John did the right thing analysis. When he makes the phone call, puts his coins down, and summons the cleaning crew in, he's looking to eliminate any evidence of a crime. And we even see at one point where the officer, this young deputy, comes to the door and knocks on the door, and he knows damn well what's going on with John. He knows what's happening, and he just turns around and walks away.
I'll leave you be then.
It's pretty clear that he's not looking to be involved in the system in any way. I would also say that when John brings in the cleaning crew, he is engaged in the destruction of evidence. He is engaged in potentially destroying dead bodies. And there are some very rarely used code sections that would criminalize destroying a dead body without the proper license and all of those things. I think that John probably has a much bigger things going on than being worried about what he did to a dead body.
So his 4-film-long crime spree kicks off. But does all this revenge killing have any chance of bringing him closer to finding inner peace?
It's very natural for us to want to get revenge, especially towards someone who's wronged us. Psychological injury is so painful and so real and visceral that it's very human to want to go after the person who's wronged us. An eye for an eye is a really sort of relatable phrase.
An eye for an eye, John.
The reality is that the science of revenge does not confirm that taking some kind of action to balance the scales really makes any difference in our grief or reconciling the feelings that we have. In fact, if we fixate on revenge and we try to find a resolution in that way, sometimes it can kind of keep us in a mode of unresolved grief. We tend to not find emotional peace, we tend to not find resolution, and we're not giving ourselves the chance to really heal from the initial incident of trauma.
John's mental trauma turns into physical trauma for everyone else throughout the series. But aside from all the murder, what other charges could an ambitious prosecutor tack on? Jaywalking? Reckless driving? The man's an honest-to-God horse thief by the second film.
If we focus in on just the horse, it's hard to talk about the horse theft with a straight face, but he could arguably be liable for stealing a horse, and depending on the laws of the jurisdiction, stealing a farm animal could have some additional enhancements. Also, there is an emergency defense there as well. He's trying to get away to save his own life. If I went on the street right now and got into a car and started it and drove it off the street, but my intention wasn't to steal it, my intention was to get away from the person who's trying to shoot me in the head, I've got a decent defense on that. That same analysis would go for the horse in the same way, because he is trying to escape and he is using it for that purpose.
Okay, fine, scratch horse thief from his record, but back to the murder. Is there any chance that the world of assassins could be immune from federal law? Could a lawyer claim that their parallel world of rules and neutral territory makes them something akin to the Vatican or an Indian reservation?
Every once in a while, we'd have somebody who would come into the courthouse and try to argue that they were a sovereign citizen. They went deep into the weeds in the internet and found some research that claimed that maybe the laws of the state and the government and this country didn't apply to them. It fails universally all the time. And even though John Wick's government and the Continental and the High Table and all of that certainly has a lot more going on than the random person that searched on the Google, it actually really doesn't make that big of a difference. Just because they have this infrastructure and they have a hierarchy and all of that doesn't mean that they can claim that they're not subject to the laws of the country, unfortunately.
Still, for a bunch of insane, ruthless killers, why do they bother to have so many laws in the first place?
Because of the recklessness and propensity for violence among members of the organization, it's probably more helpful. It probably developed over time to have guardrails amongst the society so that it's not all chaos and havoc. There has to be some semblance of organization and a hierarchy.
Rules. Without them, we live with the animals.
With this syndicate, the hierarchy is very, very clear.
You forget that the Ruska Roma is bound by the High Table, and the High Table stands above all.
Who you take direction from, who you follow, who you need to forgive, all of that is pretty clear in the hierarchy.
Assassins even have their own underground stores and services, most memorably in the form of the sommelier.
I'd like it tasting.
What does our own firearms expert think about this movie version's offerings? Take it away, Jonathan.
This possibly is my favorite scene in the whole franchise. The whole idea as they're expanding the lore of this assassin universe, it just worked so well to have someone who suggests your weapons for you. Absolutely love that idea. The room is actually packed with other firearms that I was too excited to even pay attention to first time around. A number of Uzis. There's an M79 tucked in the corner there, just casually propped up. Not very Hitman friendly, but hey, given how things go down later on in the movie, maybe he should have packed one of those as well.
I know of your past fondness for the German varietals, but I can wholeheartedly endorse the new breed of Austrians.
Interesting, he goes with whatever the sommelier tells him to go with rather than questioning it. This is the big switch from the HK P30L that he had in the first movie to the Glocks.
Glock 34 and 26.
On the face of it, the Glock's a great choice. 34 giving you a longer barrel, in theory maybe a little bit more accuracy, and the ever so slight increase in muzzle velocity aren't a huge help in terms of actually trying to fight people, but it has a lot of screen presence, and it's a Glock, legendary combat police service pistol, civilian self-defense, you name it, competition as well. The main reason an assassin might not go for a Glock, potentially if there's some sort of elite assassin like John's supposed to be, is the trigger on the standard Glock is not great. A bit sort of mushy and sludgy and indistinct. You might expect him to have a custom trigger, and this comes with a custom trigger. And he has the little baby brother, the Glock 26, as a sort of holdout gun. Comes in very handy later on as well.
It's one thing to convincingly sell guns, but now let's see how well John handles them in the iconic cavern shootout of John Wick 2.
The idea of staging the long guns so you don't walk in with them, and to hide the guns where you don't immediately need them, ready for use, was a really cool aspect to the whole sort of hitman thing. Because in the scheme of things, John doesn't do so much hitmanning. As to the choices, any AR-15 is a good choice. This is a bit of a race gun, but nothing too excessive. Little stubby vertical grip compensator, as they say. Well, if you're firing, you're taking on a lot of bad guys, as it turns out you have to do. The 1:6 variable optic, they were becoming extremely popular at this time, or had become in the sporting world. So definitely on trend, which is amusing given the whole sort of fashion wine connoisseur vibe of this whole scene. I'm flattered to be asked what I would choose. I can't replace the redoubtable Peter Serafinowicz in this role, but to be honest, I might well go for something similar. I like the slightly less race gun vibe of the HK in the first movie, but if I get to shoot a handgun, I like to shoot Glocks, so I'd probably still go for a Glock. Why not go for a fancy one? The AR, I cannot criticize that choice at all. I'd recommend something similar as well. I'm a bit critical of the switch to pistol caliber later on. I would stick with controllable caliber like 5.56. Relatively high capacity, he goes for extended magazines. Even though in the shootout, he actually reloads more than he needs to. And the Benelli, I can't deny how cool that is. It leads to one of the coolest takedowns of the entire franchise, bracing the guy against the wall while he reloads. And I guess the only questionable aspect is, if you need a shotgun, why not just stage more magazines for your rifle? What's the benefit of the shotgun other than Keanu was doing a lot of 3-gun competition and he and the director really wanted 3 guns?
But the one crucial thing John neglected to bring down there? Ear protection.
Having been to that location where they filmed the big shootout, it's going to be extremely loud down there. A lot of this was filmed with blank firing firearms. Blanks are not quite so punchy as real live rounds, but they're still very loud. So how would they cope with that? Well, in-ear hearing protection is extremely good now. You can get custom fitted in-ear hearing protection that is electronic, and it takes out all the top end and saves your hearing. That's how they protected their hearing in real life, I'm sure. And if you were going to do this in real life, as well as getting your guns, your suit, whatever else, you would get earplugs.
John kills so many people in these. Sometimes it makes you wonder, is he merely doing what it takes to complete his mission, or is part of him just doing this for the rush?
In some ways, John Wick isn't satisfied with 1 or 2 killings.
I think you're addicted to it, to the vengeance. It's all you have.
He is somewhat obsessed and fixated with hunting down every single person and their associates who have anything to do with stealing his car and abusing his dog to death. And in some ways, this series of actions can be emotionally cathartic for him. In the same way that he's driving his car in the abandoned airfield, mowing people down with guns is another way that he's getting this adrenaline fix. It is absolutely processing some emotions in him. Again, it's probably not very reparative and certainly not very adaptive, but that's sort of the John Wick style of handling difficult emotions.
So he handles his emotions poorly at times, sure. But he handles his weapons with perfection. Even everyday objects turn deadly in his hands.
He once killed 3 men in a bar.
With a pencil. I know, I've heard the story, sir.
Pencil!
So maybe to avoid further legal troubles, he could stick to the more creative methods.
If I had to advise him in the moment whether he was going to use a knife, a gun, or a library book, I would advise library book all day, every day. In most states, we have enhancements for using a firearm. It makes it a more serious crime. We have enhancements for using a deadly weapon. It makes it a more serious crime. So if the charges eventually end up being murder, and then it's murder with a firearm, there's a bigger penalty. There's not anything in the law right now about an extra penalty for death by library book. So I would say go with the library book all day. It's also a lot more interesting.
Well, there you have it. Use a book so the judge won't throw the book at you. So after all these films, he's legally in the clear, right?
at the end of the day, there's no way that John could unwind and just make himself right with our justice system, with everything that he's done in his life, without just committing to being behind bars for the rest of his life. There's no way that that story ends if we're trying to resolve it within our criminal justice system with John ever walking free.
Oh well, I guess John Wick will just have to go to jail quietly then. Bailiff, arrest that man. Bailiff? No? Anyone? All right, fine, one more killing spree. But just one. You're getting too old for this shit.
Yeah.